Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I am your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and today's guest is Nicola Clinch. I met Nicky in London several months ago, and we had dinner, and I was impressed by her. She seemed like somebody that I wanted on my team. She seemed like somebody that I wanted to befriend, and she also seemed soft and powerful and enigmatic in an intriguing way. And I later learned that she is a specialist in human behavior and ontology, which is the nature of being human. She's also a specialist in childhood trauma and development, somatic trauma work, breath work, 5-element alignment, Chinese medicine, and she's an initiated shaman as well as a Hay House best-selling author of a book called Surrender. And in this conversation, we talk about maturation as well as many other random, giggle-inducing, heart-opening, brain-melting things. It's a fun one. We are very aligned. We vibed. We laughed. We dove deep. We took tangents and we dove through rabbit holes in an attempt to unlock some of the more mysterious things that life has to offer. So this one is great. I loved this conversation. I had so much fun. I have so much time for Nicky and her work. I consider her a new pal, and I look forward to learning more about her and making more memories in the future. So enjoy this conversation with Nicola Clinch. So I was just about to say that I did the Camino, this big walk in Spain over the summer, and I do it every year. And the guy that I took was my buddy named Shell Ooms. And one day at dinner, he's this like kind of Midwesterny guy, and he's like, "Let her rip, tater chip." And then everybody kind of looked at him and giggled, and like, I like that. I've never heard anybody say that. But as we were just about to press record and we were checking in, "Well, you good? You feel fine? Okay.
Good.
Let her rip, tater chip." But Nikki, welcome to
I
the
love that.
podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Hi to all the listeners. Feels good to
Yeah.
be sitting here having this conversation.
Yeah, we'll see where this meandering rabbit hole takes us. But I do like to start, for those listening that have no idea who Nikki is, they've never heard of you. They're like, who is this lady? How do you describe yourself? Like, who are you? What's your deal?
Well, I always pause a bit when somebody asks me that because I think the initial way to answer that is to answer with what I do. But of course, what I do is not who I am. So what I do is I work with a lot of different kinds of human beings and helping them. I guess somebody described my work the other day by saying that I excavate the childhood from the body mind. So I help people outgrow their history, their stories, their wounds, their trauma that is frozen in the body mind consciousness and coloring how we see ourselves and how we see our reality. So I have formed a body of knowledge where I brought Chinese medicine together with psychology and ontology, where I work with the energetics and the emotions and the way that the mind works and the way that memory works in order to be able to, I guess, surgically help people dissolve attachments to what has been frozen based on their history. And it's very deep work. It's really beautiful work. And it's something that I feel very passionate about and I feel lucky to do. Who I am is I'm a half Chinese 45-year-old woman. I've lived a lot, many lives. I have 2 beautiful children. And I feel like I'm in a phase of my life where I'm just kind of finally getting started. Like everything was a kind of a training program and a warm-up process for this phase of my life where I get to really live in the way that I've always wanted to live. So Yeah, I feel like who I am is a woman led by inspiration and a vision to help as many people as I can be free.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much in there that we'll dive into, but I'm curious when you talk about that you're just getting started, right?
Yeah.
At 45, like why now? What got in the way of that? Like what happened?
Well, of course, when you're living the life, it doesn't feel like anything's getting in the way. You're just living your life and it feels normal and it feels like the way it is. And, my work is called maturation. And I guess you only discover what you know once you know it. And so when I look back on the last, let's say the last few decades, um, there's been a very natural and organic process of maturing. And I don't just mean maturing biologically, I mean maturing in consciousness, and in wisdom as a woman. And, when I look back and I say I'm just getting started now, I think it's taken this many years and this many decades to really be able to embody and integrate what I've learned through working with a lot of people and making a lot of mistakes. What I've learned I've just come out of a 13-year marriage, what I've learned in that, really kind of learning from what I wasn't able to do and what I didn't do authentically and what felt right and what didn't feel right. And I think it's kind of now when it's all come together and I feel like more myself than I've ever felt before. And I think that is just an organic process that comes with maturing. Not, and I say that with no kind of condescension. I mean, like maturing just from living and making a lot of mistakes and integrating the lessons that we get to learn. So, yeah, it feels exciting for me to be able to start to kind of be here at 45.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading this meme once and it talked about like wisdom acquisition and like how do you learn to make better choices is by making a lot of worse choices, right? It's like, oh,
Yes.
not that, not that, not that. And then what's left is like, I'm gonna go that way. But a question
Yeah.
for
I mean,
you is, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's a teaching that I always say with my clients that, we're either learning or we're blaming, and you can't do both. You have to choose a paradigm. And so you're either blaming yourself or blaming someone else. But if you do that, you stay stuck and you don't grow and you don't mature. Or you can choose to learn. And learning is an entire paradigm to live from. So whatever we do, whether it was an apparent mistake or painful or difficult or good or bad, are we going to choose to learn from it or are we going to blame? And one allows us to evolve and the other one keeps us stuck. So, I think if we're coming from the paradigm of learning, then we get to live in a very constant growth state.
That's a great line. I wrote it down. We're either learning or blaming. The question I was going to ask you is, what does it feel like to be more yourself than you've ever been? Like, if you had to describe that to someone listening right now, that's like, well, no, I'm myself. I'm always myself. Duh.
Well, I think that I think firstly, we go through stages of this. We've all heard, the kind of wisdom teachers and the spiritual teachers that we've all like the Oneself, Ram Dass, Krishnamurti. We've all heard them say, we're all searching for home, or we're all walking each other home. So really, what is this experience of home? And it's a big piece in the work that I do with people is that in order to even need to release so much of the childhood, the purpose and the intention is to return back to an authentic essence that was always there before the survival patterns and the survival mechanisms would start to build based on how we inherently just need to protect ourselves from not being hurt. Or from loss, or from losing love, which is just nature and part of being human. So what is this authentic essence that I think we're all, whether we're conscious or unconscious, looking for or trying to return to. And in my experience, what it feels like is in equal measure this kind of wondrous discovery of something new, while simultaneously feeling so familiar and remembered and at home. It's something we've always known. So it kind of feels like both at the same time. And, I've seen a lot of my clients go through those moments when you return back to something that is such an authentic essence, and it's like a discovering, and at the same time, oh yeah, this feels so right.
Right. It's like I remember this sensation.
Exactly. I remember this person. I remember this feeling. Oh, right, this energy. Yeah, it just feels like I'm returning back to something.
Yeah, I was walking around somewhere the other day and I had a smell, and it was like a perfume smell that reminded me of like my grandma from back in the day. And it was just instantly like I was time traveling. And when you were describing that, it felt similar to that. And then at the beginning, when you talked about being I think you said a childhood excavator, it seems like that's the process, right? Of excavation or archaeological digging. You're removing everything on top of the thing that you're looking for, and you're just taking away everything that's not that thing. Was that
Exactly.
fair?
I like to use the analogy of mining for diamonds. It's like mining for diamonds. You literally dig away at the earth so much, and it feels like you're not getting anywhere, but you just keep digging and digging and digging until eventually a diamond pops through. But the diamond was always there. You didn't find the diamond. You cleared enough away for the diamond to reveal itself. And that's what I do with people in their own lives and in their own selves.
Yeah. Yeah, just taking that even like a weird step forward. It's like when you find those diamonds out there in the dirt, they just look kind of like a rock. And I've seen these videos and people are like, look at the size of this diamond. And in my brain, I'm like, that's just a rock. But then you shine it up and you take it away and clean it even more. And it's like, oh, that is a diamond. And I think so for many of us, we might not recognize that we're holding a diamond or that we are a diamond until somebody from the outside comes over and gives us that little bit of support or reassurance or encouragement or holds the mirror in a certain way, right? That sounds a
Yeah.
little bit like what you do for people.
Yeah. I was just listening to I'm reading a book at the moment called The Quantum Revelation. If anybody wants to read an amazing book on quantum science, it's so powerful. It's by Paul Levy. And I'm reading it at the moment, and he was speaking about beauty, and how beauty, it is not a presentation of something or a masking of something or a showing of something, but beauty itself is a way that the universe expresses itself. And when beauty is recognized by another soul, it awakens something like a remembrance in that soul. And so the way that I heard it is that what is getting in the way of our beauty and the resonance of our beauty, like the diamonds, like what needs to be kind of cleared away and shared away? What are we carrying? What beliefs? What pains? What resentments? What are we carrying that's getting in the way of that kind of that beautiful resonance to shine through, which is in everyone? And when it does, I don't know whether you've ever experienced it, but when you're in the presence of someone that's really at home in themselves, really just authentic, it moves you. It kind of touches you, and you don't understand quite why. When you're about to have a baby, when your baby comes out and you witness something so pure and so untethered, it will move you so deeply that you won't even know why, but you'll be crying.
Yeah, one of Kendra's friends, I think yesterday, messaged her, left a comment on a post that she did and said, like, when you look them in the eyes for the first time, everything changes. And my buddy Mark Groves said to me in a text, like, your brain rewires itself forever, like when that
Yes.
occurs. That's so fascinating to me because if that is true, and I believe it to be true based on like goosebumps right here and the caliber of people telling it to me, then that also means that in other circumstances that you can rewire your brain immediately, and it doesn't necessarily need to take a child, right? That it can be this malleable thing that shifts the way that you look at the world and your past and yourself.
Yes. And I think the thing for people to know when they hear this is that rewiring the neural pathways can happen in a moment. And I think that's what everybody think, we have to dig the earth and we're looking for diamonds, but the moment that can change your life can happen in a moment. But the thing we need to remember is that the way that the human mind works is that it's a pattern repetition device. So even though something so magnificent rewires just from the experience of it, the magnetic pull to return back to what is familiar is so strong that our work is becoming conscious to that magnetic pull so that we have more power over it and not let it pull us back. So, you know how a lot of people I work with may find it more jarring to let a lot of love into their life or a lot of abundance in their life. They're so used to being in anxiety. Or, I recently let love into my life again, and it was so interesting to me how something so beautiful was so shocking to my mind. Like my mind was kind of looking for all the problems that weren't there. And so there's a kind of a magnetic pull to pull us back to an old familiar suffering, even though something so beautiful can just change you at a moment. So I think it's being conscious of both that pull back and then being able to have a choice, conscious choice to not go there. And also knowing that our life can change in a moment. So it's both.
Yeah. How was that moment for you when you recognized in yourself after teaching this for decades, like, oh,
I'm a human
love,
being.
I'm a human being. And like, I also have these things where I equate love with discomfort and fear and suffering and avoidance and da.
It was, firstly, my teacher has always said to me, no matter how successful you get, no matter how good your work is, whatever happens, never forget that you are also a human being. You will never escape from being a human being. So whatever everyone else is struggling with, I am too. I have the same human mind, and it works the same way. So it was shocking to me how much the mind wanted to shut down something so beautiful. And it took, 20 years of work on myself to be conscious enough to just shut up and not act out on it and not do anything about it and just like just sit with it. Sit with the fears, sit with everything your mind is telling you. Run, don't do that. You're being too vulnerable. Don't open too much. You're giving yourself away. Blah, 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 blah. All that stuff. And it's like, just sit with it. Be patient. Shut up and just sit.
Yeah. Is that the practice for you? Is to like literally sit with it, like meditation or journaling or?
I call it to be with it, which is actually, a lot of people will think that sounds really passive, but it takes a lot of consciousness to be with the emotional experience that rushes through the body and not resist it, not push it away, not suppress it, while simultaneously being conscious of how this is the past, right here in the present. You said earlier that you were time traveling, you smelt something, and just like that, you were back with your grandmother. The mind cannot distinguish time. It can distinguish what is real or imagined, and it cannot distinguish whether it's past or present. And so we could be flooded with something that happened 45 years ago. My father leaving, or my mother's angry rage tantrums, whatever it is, it can be here like that. And so being with, which is a very big part of my practice, and it takes a lot of work to even get to that point, is can I choose to be completely 100% responsible for the experience that is moving through me right now, whilst also being fully conscious that it is the path. And so letting it move through me and the noise of the mind, not resisting it, feeling it, but not acting on it either. And then what really happens is, these frozen moments in time, they dissolve and they unfreeze and they release. And before you know it, you are more available to love, because that past mechanism, that piece that was always this kind of stuck there, was able to move and release.
Yeah. It's so peculiar how when you think about the past in your brain and you think about something that happened decades ago, or you think about something that happened this morning, they just seem like then, right? It's just this amorphous then. And it doesn't feel older. It doesn't feel like a dusty or black and white movie that's being shown. It's just vivid then. So when you talk about being with the past, but also staying conscious in the present and recognizing it for what it is and being with the feelings, is there self-talk involved with that? Or like, what is the practice to remain sort of grounded in that?
Well, in our main kind of signature program, which is a program for listening to life, and really the kind of backbone of what my work is ontology. BodyMind ontology is teaching the design and the structure of the human condition, of being human. And within that, there are particular blind spots that we as a species are stuck in our relationship with reality. And one of those blind spots is time. We confuse the past with the present, and we don't even know it. It really appears like what is appearing right now is real and true and happening now. So that's why we end up in relationships where it's same man, different pants. It's like I keep changing relationships, but they all end up like my mother. Like, what is that? What's all that about? You keep changing jobs and they're just like your dad. Or why do we keep repeating these same patterns? Because, we think that time is linear, but it's not linear. The past is not back there. Look, the past is in here in the memory bank. It's here right now. In fact, everything that is of the mind is everything we've absorbed of the past. And if we are unconscious of that, and it is a blind spot, and just for everybody listening, we don't know that we're in a blind spot until the very moment we discover the blind spot. Until that moment, what appears to us appears as normal and the way it is. And so, we continually get the past confused with the present, which is why is it that whenever I make money, no matter how much I make, I always end up feeling unsafe? This is just what I hear clients struggle with. Or why is it whenever what I've always wanted is love and connection, but whenever I get into relationships, I always feel like I'm going to be abandoned and betrayed? Why do these pieces keep repeating? Well, because something of our past is coloring how we experience the present, and we don't know it. I've forgotten your question now, but I hope what I'm saying is useful and interesting.
It is useful and interesting. I find myself occasionally just being like, yeah, just keep talking. This is like a great TED Talk. I'm really enjoying that. Yeah, so we have, as humans, blind spots that we don't recognize as blind spots until we know they're blind spots, which strikes me as quite annoying and sort of obnoxious. And when you talk about time and we're repeating patterns that are sort of frozen in us, that are these comfortable forms of suffering. So how does one escape this labyrinth? How does one begin to de-thaw these frozen stories?
In the way that I work with people is they're kind of two journeys that have to happen, and they have to happen at the same time. And one is being conscious, becoming conscious and aware of the design of human being and the structure, so that even though you have a mind and even though you still have the same survival mechanism as me and everyone else, we are able to start becoming conscious and present to it rather than being in it and run by it. So that's a very, very big, that sounds like a small thing, but that's a big step. That creates a huge shift in your relationship to being a human being. I'll give an example. One morning I woke up, and as my eyes opened, I was already anxious. And I'm sure a lot of people will listen to this and relate. I'm already anxious. In fact, I was already waking up into a world where the potentiality of something scary and dangerous to happen was the way it is. I was able to be conscious enough to lie there going, well, why? I haven't even got out of bed yet. It doesn't make any logical sense. Now, from an ontological context, it's not what we see that is running our world, but where we're seeing from that runs our world. Meaning, what is the context that we're seeing from that is literally looking through our eyes and giving us the appearance of our world? It's like being brought up in Asia, the way that I see the world, the context from which I see the world is very different. Your wife-to-be is half Asian. I'm sure you noticed there are differences, cultural differences in the way that the world appears, based on the context that the environment that you've been brought up in. So ontology teaches us that reality isn't just the way it is. It's colored by where you're seeing from, right? Yeah. That's every human being. So where was I seeing from that I opened my eyes and I was already waking up into a world that was scary, even though nothing was happening and I hadn't left the bed. And when I sat and I really, really did some inquiry around it, ontological inquiry, I realized, wow, it's a 4-year-old. Literally, I'm waking up into a 4-year-old's world. She's looking through my eyes, and that is the experience of the world that she had. And that is that entangled past and present time that human beings get stuck in. You see, we will just get up and we'll deal with the world thinking, I guess the anxiety is going to be there and I'm going to suck it up, and I guess, but it kind of colors everything that we experience. And what we don't realize is that in the neural pathways, there was a moment when I was 4 that got frozen that colors that anxiety that's still there. Or it's not so much anymore, but it was having a big imprint on my world. And so, if we're not conscious of the entire design of human being, then we're just looking at it from an individual place, and it's not deep enough. It's like going up in an airplane and you rise up to 30,000 feet and you look out the window and you start to see patterns in the landscape that you couldn't see when you were standing on the ground. Right? So standing on the ground is like Jeremy just trying to work out what's wrong with Jeremy. But if we rise up to 30,000 feet and we look at Jeremy from the context of human being, you'll start to see patterns in the way that you're being Jeremy that will make a lot of sense that you couldn't see just standing on ground level. So that's one of the important things that we teach people. We take people through that process in ontology, the BodyMind Maturation. And then the second thing is becoming very conscious of your particular wiring, your particular story. how your environment colors and shapes how you experience the world. I was able to have enough consciousness of my experience of love and fear, enough that I could be able to choose how to be with it. And choice is power. It takes a lot of work to be able to have real choice over what runs us.
Yeah, I think this is also super helpful, not just individually, but collectively and relationally. I'm thinking especially of my partner, where there have been moments, and there will be more. Like, for example, she's pregnant right now, so there's a lot of nesting, it's called, I'm learning. And so she
Yes.
she looked at the closet and assessed the closet as messy, and we need a deep clean and to reorganize everything, right? And I looked at the closet and I saw some shoes. I was like, they evoked no emotion in me. There was like no story. There was not, even if I had to list 20 adjectives, not one of them would lead to this conclusion of like, oh, we should probably take all of those shoes out and clean the floor below the shoes. And like, but for her reality was very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was viewing the same thing that I was viewing, but from a completely different story. And rather than me judging her, or you see that like, oh, she's just crazy or she's irrational, it was like, oh, from where she is right now, the things that need to happen are different. And that helps me to be more compassionate and understanding and kind.
Yes. Well, that's actually a really beautiful example, because, and it's a trivial enough example that there's not enough, it's not a heavy emotional component
Right.
to it. So we can kind of let that in a little easier, but that we're doing that all the time. You know, when, hands up, everybody listening, when you've been in an argument with your partner and you're fighting whose reality is the right one.
Mm.
It's like, well, that's the wrong question. It's impossible. No, there is no right reality. The only reality is the one that's appearing to us, and that is the nature of reality. But yes, your nesting is a real thing, Jeremy. I remember around 38 weeks starting to scrub the skirting boards on the outside of my house.
Right.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We could go down that rabbit hole for sure, but I'm going to attempt to get us back on track. Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, right? And going back to what you said a moment ago with the blind spots, and it strikes me that if I'm in an argument or having conflict or a point of disagreement with my partner, then in some way we're perhaps both in this blind spot of not realizing the other person has a different reality than we do, and we're just like trying to be right, or we're trying to influence, or we're trying to rather than just zooming out from that airplane view and be like, oh, they're just seeing things a little bit differently than I am right now.
Yes.
So
exactly.
the work is like on an individual level, but it ripples out to everyone that's around you. And I suppose when you're talking about aura or essence or businesses or clients or friends, then this is like the ripple effect.
Well, I mean, it's a huge component, because if you hadn't noticed, we seem to have major communication issues on this planet.
What? You
we
mean
don't
politically?
we don't seem to be able to listen to each other at all, and we don't seem to know how to communicate to each other. And those are two very basic things that we need to know how to do in order to relate to each other. But those two things are colored completely by the way that we see the world and from where we're seeing it from. So, in my work, we are working with people individually, but it has a massive collective impact. I mean,
Yeah.
I literally watch people come out of the programs and then, they've their marriages completely transform, not because they've changed their husband or they changed much about what they were doing, but suddenly the way her husband appeared to her, which was always the one that was always dismissing her and not loving her, suddenly she saw him more clearly because she wasn't blinded by her childhood. You know, I'm now out of my marriage, but I remember a point around 9 years when I realized I hadn't ever really seen my ex-husband at all. All I had ever seen is the one who was meant to keep me safe. And it's like when you're blinded by the veil of your childhood, we don't see each other for who we are. We see our projections of each other. And then, of course, that gets in the way of what we want from each other, which is connection.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a friend that was going through a breakup and she was working with a therapist, and the therapist challenged her to take a 3-month break from men, of like flirting, dating, all of it. She called it a he talks. And there's also like a she talks. I don't know if you've heard those words. No.
Amazing.
So yeah, so she was on her he talks, and she told me one of the things that struck her was that the therapist said, look, like, you can start dating again, but what's going to happen is we're going to have the same conversation in a year or 2 years when that relationship ends up in the exact same way that this one has for you. And
Yes.
that, in her telling me what he said to her, something like struck me where I was like, oh, this is like the grand pattern interrupter. And it sounds like
Yes.
that's exactly what you're discussing here.
Absolutely. I mean, I say it in my podcast, and it triggered some people because it really challenges the story of romance and the fairy tale. I am a strong believer that the sole purpose of relationships is for spiritual evolution. I don't think it's that we're meant to make each other happy. I don't think it's about a fairy tale. I think it's because there are only certain points that we can reach in ourselves before we need an intimate mirror. And that intimate mirror is the catalyst for us to reach those points that we just can't access alone. And so when you can hold a relationship in that context, then you're meant to mirror back these pieces to each other. That's the point. Once the honeymoon phase is over and all the chemicals have kind of worn off, that's when the real relationship begins and you really meet each other. You know, I'm just in a new relationship now, and it's interesting because there are still elements in me that are identical to his ex, and there are still elements of him that are identical to mine. But we're kind of a more evolved, mature version of it. And so we're clearing and working through things very quickly and easily. And so it's like those patterns don't go away. The invitation is we just to become more mature and able to communicate and deal with them. And whatever we don't deal with in one, we're going to take with us to the next.
Yeah. Amen. Been there, got the t-shirt. Yeah, like
everybody's got the t-shirt.
Yeah. No, nothing unfamiliar about that. But yeah, it's
but it doesn't fit the Instagram story. It doesn't fit the pictures and the shininess, and I think that's why relationships have been in real struggle, because once things get rocky, that's actually when the real work begins.
Yeah, it's such a bummer when that honeymoon phase ends and you're like, oh, you're also a human. You're not this
like,
angelic perfection with no flaws. What's even worse than that, it's like at the beginning, the flaws are like the best part. Like, oh, it's so cute how you do that thing.
So beautiful. And then at the end, you're like, oh, I really need to deal with this now.
Yeah. Like, there. Kendra has this like a couple of voices to describe me and my personality at times, which we found to be quite effective, is like add some levity or lightness to it, right? So she has one voice where she's like, there you are, just right there, always there. just never leaving, just there. Right? And I'm like, okay, you need some space. Like, I'm gonna go for a walk, or do you need to go for a walk? Do you want to take the car? Like, right? And so just naming these very human irritations as they come up with a bit of levity. And it sounds, I mean, I've not worked with you as a client, but I feel like you're a person that would inject some levity and lightness to the deep work of becoming and excavating. It's such a,
I mean, I think if you, it's actually a real evolved place to be if you can just laugh at how hilarious it is being human. Like we're all the same. I worked with grandmothers, grandfathers, people in India, people in America, all over the planet. And yeah, we have a lot of differences, but underneath those differences, we're not just similar, we're the same. We're the same. And we get irritated, and our mind works the same way, and we try to protect in similar ways. Like the way that it's expressed is different, but what's running it is the same. And so if we can laugh about it, if you can even laugh at your own self, like when my mind was going mental on me, trying to find every reason not to get closer to this human being, I just had to laugh at the ridiculousness of this, because it's what the mind does, and it's actually not personal.
yes, like, what is going on right now?
Like, this is crazy. Why is it doing this? And that when you get that moment that you can laugh at your own self, because stepping into a pattern that you just keep repeating, that moment you laughed, it's like the power of it just it's gone. It can't hurt you.
What's like an example of self-talk so you laugh, you realize you're a crazy person in the moment, and that's like not a judgmental thing. It's like, I'm a crazy person, laughter, what is happening? And then there's got to be a space between that part and then the healing, work through it, move past it stage where you've evolved and like have dealt with it.
Well, I think the next step is a hard step, and I want to name it because it's actually one of the ones that almost everyone I know resists and finds the hardest. Once you see it, are you ready to be 100% responsible for it? Because we are 100% responsible for being the source of our experience. Meaning, Kendra cannot make you angry. The anger was already there. She just bumped into it, or rubbed up against it, or nudged it. Like, our experience is already there. Nobody can put it inside of us, and nobody can make it happen. If the mind recognizes what he's doing or she's doing as something that activates it, that's my experience. And so if we really want to get to the point of healing, the first step is, am I ready to take full ownership that I am 100% responsible for this? And what I mean by responsibility is I don't mean blame, I don't mean shame, and I don't mean guilt, but I mean 100% ownership. Meaning, you did not put this in me. I am generating this right now. And so I will be the one to feel it.
Yeah. But it's easier to go with option one, which is to blame, right?
Yeah, I know it is. You put this here, or you did this, or why do you breathe that way, or why? I remember this one time with my ex. I was just in the kitchen and I was so happy and I didn't have any problems. And then he came in and I was like, and then my mind started going, why is he picking up the kettle that way? He's breathing funny today. Like the whole starts kicking in. And then before I know it, I'm like, oh, I really want to pick a fight. Like, it's so real. It's like things that were just too good. And the magnetic pull to go back to the same, like, it's like, how much it took me in that moment to be responsible for what I really wanted to just.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the poor guy's just trying to make a cup of tea.
He's just making a cup of tea. Living his best life.
Right. Like, why are you doing it that way? You'd be like, what? Like,
Yeah, I know, but
yeah,
everyone listening, I bet you we can relate. It's like the way our partner rolls their eyes. Is it really that they're dismissing you, or are they just rolling their eyes and they don't even know they're doing it?
yeah. Yeah, I have a couple examples of this I could touch on, but I think I might go to my higher self and bite my tongue and swallow that story.
Yeah, no,
No, it's
blaming is seductive, and I think that
yeah,
we're collectively and culturally addicted to blaming. And I think that's why we're in such a shitstorm on the planet right now, is it takes so much courage and maturity to start being in ownership of the reality that we're experiencing.
yeah, yeah. Once you start looking through that lens, you see it as personalities and societies and cultures and social norms and the way that people talk to each other politically or on the internet. It's this very like throwing out kind of vibe rather than
Yes.
pausing and taking a moment to reflect.
Yeah, and I
But
just want to say also, this is not easy stuff. Like when we've got horrific wars taking place on the planet, and we're
mm,
seeing such such just horrific things, to be able to be with that grief and the heartbreak of that, and not try and attack and try and blame and try to fight for something externally, is that it's a lot. It's a lot to take on, but unfortunately, that's kind of what needs to happen, because what we're doing isn't working.
yeah. Why why does responsibility have such a bad reputation? Or perhaps a better way to phrase it is like, how does responsibility relate to maturation?
Well, I think the word responsibility triggers a lot of people, because I think just inherently and mostly unconsciously, it will relate to your relationship to your mother and your father. So it's like your original authority roles. So as soon as people hear responsibility, it's just like a trigger point for whatever is unresolved with mom and dad, which they were the original power roles, right? So that's why we hate responsibility, because the kind of child in us that still wants to fight that fight, or whatever it is that's unresolved with mom and dad, will resist the responsibility. But what I mean by responsibility in maturation is ownership. Um, and ownership is power. It's powerful to take ownership that your reality is the way it is because of what's moving through you. Meaning, if you do take ownership of it, you start to actually get choice on what kind of reality you do want to live in. You don't just get stuck with a reality that you think you have to try and work out.
That's a big deal.
That's a massive deal. And that's the
Like,
distinction between victimhood and power.
mm, like taking ownership for your own life and how you show up in it.
Yes,
This seems like the core stuff.
exactly. Which, of course, that is maturity. It's like it, and I say this with no judgment, how much resistance we have to really growing up. It's like I know so many people that behave the same way as my 5-year-old toddler. But it's just they're in a grown man's body, and I say this with love. We don't get older, we just get taller.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it described as the difference between elders and elderly, right? There's a
Yes,
big distinction in terms of wisdom, maturation, ownership, etc., and a number of years that you've been on the planet, right?
exactly.
But it's like, again, it's just so much easier to
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 blame.
blame.
I
Like, no, you
I
don't
know.
understand. I mean, I see this with clients. I do this all the time too. Like, no, you don't understand. I don't think you understand what I'm saying here. So I'm gonna explain it another way to try to get you onto my side and tell me how great I am and how I did nothing wrong. And it's like, no, like I get what you're trying to do here. And like I'm trying to guides you to this other path of maturation and ownership
Yeah.
and responsibility.
It's hard to grow up. And there's something really seductive. And I'm going to say something that may sound shocking to your listeners, but I see this time and time again. The greatest human addiction of all is the addiction we have to our survival stories. We are addicted to our survival path. We want out. We want to be free, but we're also really attached to them. So blaming is seductive. It's like, how much more can I be resentful today? Or how much more can I be a martyr today? And I speak for myself. This was my story. It's like, how can I say one more time that nobody ever supports me and I'm all on my own? Like, oh, I'm so sick of hearing myself say the same old shit. But it's seductive. It's kind of yummy. But it keeps us stuck.
Why is it so yummy? Is it just familiar? Is that the core of it?
I think it creates kind of like a charge. It creates a kind of like a charge experience, which we confuse with aliveness. But that's not aliveness. That's drama.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is relevant, but when I first started dating Kendra, I wrote this post about how I was bored and I wanted to break up with her. And I like sat down to make a pro and con list, and I could think of nothing on the con list. And it was so perplexing to me as a scientist dork. And I was like, what? What is going on here? So I just stayed with her because I had no reason to break up with her. And then I realized about 2-3 months in, like, oh, this is healthy. Like, this is what a healthy relationship is. And I'm not walking on eggshells, and I'm not being passive aggressive, and I'm not like having the makeup sex and a roller coaster up and down, highs and lows. It was like, oh, this is actual health. That's good.
Yes. Thank you for presencing that, because I don't think we hear people talk about that enough. Like, I literally have people come out of our programs and the anxiety they struggled with their whole life is gone, and they feel bored. Because that kind of fake drama gave them a feeling that they were alive. And so, we're addicted to this. And at the same time, we want to get out, which is why it's so difficult being a human being.
Yeah. And the other aspect of that is that I've associated boredom with presence, right? Like, oh, I'm not bored, I'm just present. And like, when you look around the world and look how animals are, like they're just like laying around in the grass, or they're just like sitting in a tree, just being super fucking bored. And it's like, maybe that's the actual way I'm wired. And through this civilization society clusterfuck, I've kind of like grown used to all of these triggers and dramas, etc. And so, yeah, I don't know. I call meditation is like presence practice or boredom practice. It's like, I feel like it's trying to gear me towards that.
I think we're taught from kindergarten to be kind of overstimulated and to have instant gratification and stimulation. My children go to a different kind of education. They go to a Waldorf education school, so they don't have screens. My son doesn't even learn to read or write until he's 7 or 8, because they don't want to infiltrate the brain, the creative part of the brain, until he's more mature. And what's interesting about the way that Waldorf teaches children is that boredom is a fundamental piece to their childhood. Meaning, if you're not giving them screens and you're not giving them that instant something to fill the space, they get bored. And what I've discovered, which was kind of mind-blowing to me, was if you let them be bored long enough, just at the moment before you're about to bail, they create something amazing.
That's interesting.
So boredom is like, it's like the fertile ground for create something new and creative to be born.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a unifying theme of much of what we're discussing here is this kind of like crunchy resistance, like you've got to actually go do this thing you don't really want to do or that is good for you and interrupt these patterns, etc. Do you have any advice or encouragement or like words of wisdom for those navigating this journey? Like, what do you say to your clients? And
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is, please don't beat yourself up, because everybody, and this is 100%, everyone I've ever worked with, every person thinks that they are doing something wrong. And somehow they're more messed up than everyone else. Secretly. We kind of secretly think that. And I want you to know that that is inaccurate. What is happening to you, the mechanisms and the repeating patterns, yes, it is your individual responsibility, but what is running it is not actually you, and it's not personal. Meaning, as long as you are a human being, this relates to you. And the rain cloud may get you wet, but it's not raining on you personally. So
yeah,
that's the first important piece for everybody. Please let this in. That whole story that somehow you're doing this and you're messing up and it's all on you. No, you're run by a particular system called the human condition. And it's the same for everyone. It's just the way that it expresses itself through is familiar to you. So that's number one. Nothing healing can happen in an environment of blame. So if you are blaming yourself, it is getting in the way of your healing.
that's a banger. You've waited 55 minutes to drop that one on us? Like,
Nothing can heal in blame. Compassion is the gateway to all healing. And so please begin with yourself, for everyone listening. The second important piece is, if you're wondering how to find the doorway in, look at what is repeating in your life. And whatever is repeating in your life, no matter what you do, change countries, change bodies, change partners, and usually what's repeating is happening internally, meaning I always end up feeling betrayed, or I always end up feeling dismissed, or I always never feel wanted, or I never feel safe. That is usually what's repeating. So if you want to find the doorway in, look at what's repeating, and then use that to back up into it, going, right, what's happening in my body when I don't feel safe? What's happening in my mind? Become conscious to what's actually repeating. It's an internal mechanism, not external. It happens internally first before it happens externally. Once you become conscious of that, that's kind of the beginnings of you starting to open up in your world for yourself.
yeah, gently. It's like an end of a poem, like gently, child, gently, or something like that. It sounds like that's what you're describing here. Gently. Well, I don't think we touched on hardly anything that I had written down to talk to you about, but
That's good.
I was just kind of like, oh yeah, didn't talk about that. Well, hopefully it was okay. We talked about shoes and boredom and
Did we talk about shoes?
well, like my partner's shoe
Oh yes, it
thing,
happened.
the closet.
I
Yeah.
think we did good.
Okay. Well, open invitation to come back anytime you want down the road. I was going to ask you about your
Thank
book because I
you.
know you have an entire book that you wrote. Didn't really
I
hit on
do.
that.
It's
Um,
okay.
but maybe do you want to like describe the book and then let people know where to find more of you? Like I know you're on Instagram. I
Yeah.
know you have programs and courses on your website, but
Yes. So I wrote a book. It is called Surrender. Surprise, surprise. And it's with Hay House, so you can find it anywhere that sells books. I wrote it during COVID, so it was a very powerful time for me to write a book. called
Called
Surrender.
Surrender during COVID. That's just like
Yeah.
almost too cliche.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more, you can find me on my website, nickyclinch.com. We also have an amazing podcast that I host and I run called The Infinite Potential of Being Human. And the reason why it's useful to go there is I use each episode to teach on a different blind spot, ontological blind spot or distinction. So everything I speak about in that podcast is from the context of ontology. So a lot of people go there to that's where they start really learning a new paradigm of how to see things. And then from there, you can lead into our programs.
Can you just say the name of the podcast again? The Infinite Potential?
Yeah. The Infinite Potential of Being Human.
The Infinite Potential of Being Human. That sounds like a book title too. Are you writing more books down the road, do you think?
I
Or are you taking a break?
I am. I'm working on the second book now.
What's the second one about? Do you mind talking about it?
Well, I begin with a bit of a banger, and I think it's worth saying this. I'm looking at where we are on the planet right now as a species, and I share in the opening introduction of the book, and I want to share it a bit here because it's so interesting. Currently on the planet today, the self-evolution industry has grown 62% since 2019. It's now a $6.2 billion industry. And what that tells us is that there are more human beings on this planet consuming content about what is potentially the answers to our problems than ever before. So that's one really interesting thing to know. Secondly, which I also feature right underneath that presentation, is simultaneously as this is happening, mental health has never been worse than ever on our planet. More than 300 million people are suffering from anxiety. 200 million people are suffering from depression. Between 2022 and 2023, 1.3% of the entire global population got divorced. So, this is the point. Why is it that when more human beings are consuming information about the apparent answers than ever before, are our problems getting worse? And I present that the way that I do because we're in a blind spot. Everybody's trying to solve their problems on an individual level and it's a blind spot. And we need to zoom out and look at this from a human being level. Otherwise, we're missing a huge distinction. And so that's kind of how I open the book.
Guess what that. That sounds interesting. I would read that book.
Yeah. Good. I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, please do. And maybe when that one's out, you can come back on the pod and we can actually talk about the things that I intended to talk about instead of a series of meandering rabbit holes and tangents. But thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for accompanying me on this whimsical journey for the last hour, and the work you do. It's profound, it's important, and I think it's part of the medicine that we all need. So long may it shine.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody who's listening. I hope that you get a lot out of this episode. Thank you.
Oh, that was so good. Wasn't that good? She's so great. And if you want to get into her world more and soon, as mentioned in the show notes, you can find links to her book, her podcast, her Instagram account, her website, etc. I really liked this conversation with Nicky. I've been in her presence. She's great. And I hope you do. Check her stuff out. Follow along on her journey. She is a wide open, expressive heart in human form. And seems like a really good human. Okay. You're also a really good human, I bet. If you're listening to this, if you got my voice in your earbones right now, there's a good chance that you're a good human. And I hope you remember that. Despite the various things that we have to heal and overcome and achieve and accomplish and accept, you're a good human. You're doing a good job. And I appreciate you. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for the 5-star reviews. Please do send this along to someone that needs it. And as always, you can find me online at Long Distance Love Bombs. I'm open to requests. If you have topics or people you want me to chat to or reach out to, please do just let me know. Thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.